Shalom, and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamed in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. And joining me are my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky in New York City, Anshe Chesed in New York City. It's great to see you back from Israel. You're back from Louisville, Kentucky. We're traveling, and Barry, you stayed in somebody's got to teach Jewish children. Anyway, we are so happy to be with you this Parsha Talk because we got an amazing Parsha. Actually, this week is a trifecta, one of the very few trifectas on the Jewish calendar, because this week is Shabbat Hachodesh, Rosh Chodesh. We are welcoming the month of Nisan, and Nisan is the month of the Jewish people, Hachodesh. So we're not going to talk about the Rosh Chodesh portion, but we will talk about Hachodesh portion. But it is also Tazria, one of the most amazing parshiot in the Torah.
It's only skin deep though.
It is.
It's just oozing with meaning.
With humility, it's something that we need to approach. And so we'll start as three aging male rabbis and talk about the parturient woman. I never knew the word parturient until I read this parsha. The woman who gives birth. And so we have here, actually, it's a fascinating just opening. The opening deals with the woman who gives birth. If she gives birth to a male child, she is rendered tameh for 7 days. For a female child, rendered tameh for 14 days. I don't know if there's a satisfactory explanation for this. We may talk about that in a second, but let's just do the easy part of this, which is Brit Milah. So it says V'tamash v'yamim uvayom hashmini yimol b'sar alato. On the 8th day, the male child will be circumcised. So this is the source of the law of circumcision in the Torah. We also have the source of that in Breshit. Maybe you just want to give us a note or two about Brit Milah coming here in the book of Leviticus. What is its significance in this book?
Well, I was just going to observe that there's a kind of a halachic theory that is exemplified in this passage, which is to say that Breshit is a powerful book of stories. It shapes the Jewish people. But it's not considered a book of mitzvot. And so even though Milah and circumcision of Abraham is described, that's not, and it says that in all your generations this will happen. It's when it appears in the legal portions of the Torah that we regard it as having halachic significance. There's one other mitzvah in Breshit, the non-eating of the sciatic nerve, which I don't think is repeated elsewhere. It's just there. But in the main, our legal tradition wants to say that Breshit is something that happened before Moses and the legislation and the giving of mitzvot. This is the one that has, so to speak, this is where it cuts deep and it really applies.
There you have it.
Well, the fact that the Milah takes place on the 8th day is of crucial significance here, because it's after the woman has completed her first stage of impurity, and she is part of the community that's going to welcome the 8-day-old boy into its midst, not just as the mother, which is obvious, but as a member of the community. And so it's significant that it takes place after this first week.
Right. So that may, in fact, be one of the reasons why for a boy, she is rendered tameh for 7 days, so that she can be present or functional at the boy's bris, and there may be other reasons entirely. But I wanted to just to approach with, I guess, humility this theme, which is the idea that a woman in childbirth is rendered tameh, and a very compelling idea came up in the work of the late Tikva Frymer-Kensky, studies in Bible and biblical, feminist criticism, right? A book which you can see how worn it is in my library. in which she talks about that birth. When we have birth in the experience of birth, there's actually the proximity to death, and that what is it that is happening at this kind of junction? That whenever there's a birth, there's also a death. Whenever there's a death, there's also a birth, and it's perhaps because of this liminality, this approaching of the boundary, that you have this the sense that there's a need to recover from that the experience of where we could talk about the idea of the danger, and that the vulnerability of the parturient woman at the experience of death in pre-modern times, but also to a certain extent in modern times. Birth is a dangerous experience still for many women, especially women in poverty. But there is a sense that you're going from one realm to another realm, and that contact at the boundary of where death and life meet is a contact that renders you impure. I don't know if you want to react to that. Go ahead.
Again, it's significant, I think, that this is in the priestly literature, because their preoccupation is with what is holy, which is making that distinction between life and death. As we saw last week in Parashat Shmini, the mourning rites of Aaron and his sons is circumscribed because the anointing oil was on Aaron as the high priest, and they were the priests. They're not allowed to participate in rites of death, even when it's their close relatives. And I think that, Baruch Levine, in his commentary on Leviticus, which I think was around the same time that Tikva Frymer-Kensky was writing, suggests an alternate view of purity and impurity, Tuma Ta'ara, and its susceptibility and protection. That you become Tameh when you enter a stage where you are threatened or are vulnerable to danger, and you become pure when you are no longer in that danger. And as you rightly noted, Elliot, birth is one of the great times of being threatened by death, and that's historically always been the case. And the first 2 years of a child's life are also, in general, the most dangerous, right? When the child gets to be 2, then they're assured more or less of a normal lifespan. It's until they get to 2 that there are all sorts of problems, which many of us are perhaps unaware of, because we've had such advances in our medical system, which is virtually eradicated childhood disease.
It's also, I think, look, there's a mystery. There's a mystery that you come into contact with at the moment of a birth. It's a very apprehensive time, time filled with anxiety, and a time filled with tremendous awe, terror as well, and all of these things are swirling around you. I mean, the swirling, of course, for the mother more so, but for any parent who is present or adjacent, this is quite awesome, terrifying, everything at once. It's one of those life moments that are completely indescribable, ineffable.
Yeah,
I just wanted to add one other. Oh, go on, Jerome.
You go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to add just one other point, that, as was mentioned, Genesis is about family stories. It's the personal. And Leviticus and the priesthood is about the national story. And what we sometimes lose sight of is that when the woman is exposed to danger of childbirth, that threatens her, it threatens the baby, but it also threatens the entire community. Yeah. Because death does not just belong to the person who dies and their immediate family, it is a danger to the entire community.
I just wanted to illustrate the point you guys were making about the passing into the danger zone. So the woman has to bring a chatat, has to bring an offering. And chatat, we usually say, a sin offering, and that raises this kind of like obvious question, like, what's sin? We think having a child is a good thing. What does she do wrong? And I think this is a good example of what Jacob Milgram, the great Bible scholar, we mentioned Baruch Levine, we mentioned Tikva Feinberg-Ginsky, we got to have Jacob Milgram, we got to throw the whole bunch of them in there.
Just name drop here.
We're just name dropping. As Aviva Zornberg said, no, but Milgram said, chatat, it's a mistranslation. I think it is a quote sin offering. It's a purification offering. Lehit chate or chitui is a purification. Whatever the etymology of that word might have been, she is bringing a purification offering, and it's v'chiper aleha, the Kohen atones for her. It doesn't mean she's done something wrong. It means she has entered the situation of danger where she might die. Yeah. And so somehow bringing her back to normalcy and order from this time of very, electric, terrifying stuff, those sacrifices are seen to restore order, and the childbirth is seen to be a place of great disorder. Each of us has 4 kids. I'm going to guess that each of you have been present for 4 births, as I have been present for 4 births. In a hospital with modern medical technology, it's a place of disorder and craziness. In the ancient world, it must have only been more so and really terrifying. And so restoring her to like normality, order, feeling in control again, I think that this ritual part has a real value to play.
Well, just the one scene in the Torah where we definitely perceive it to be a moment of danger is the birth of Benjamin, right? Where Vatikash beledata, she has difficulty as the baby is born, and then the baby is born, and the mialedet says, "Don't worry, it's a boy," and she names him Ben Oni, and then Yaakov names him Binyamin, and it's such a remarkable scene that illustrates, in the narrative way, what is happening here, the terrible danger that is incurred by women in childbirth, which was more the norm than not. And as I said, even in populations in the United States, that experience is had as it is elsewhere in the world.
Yeah. As a technical matter in Jewish law, strange though this is, and the Talmud actually floats the alternative position, but the position that seems to have won out, normative position, is that men are commanded to pru uravu, to have children, and women are not commanded. Obviously, certainly before in vitro fertilization, and even still, basically, you need a male and a female contribution, genetic contribution. But I like to think, I don't know if this is true or not, but it seems to me that one reason why women might not be considered quote unquote commanded to have children is that it's a life-threatening experience, and you can't command somebody to risk their lives. I want to just ask a question and hear what you guys have to think. I mean, Brit Milah, deep part of Judaism. It's the blood covenant. It's even Spinoza, who hated Judaism, thought that the binding power of Brit Milah would keep this people together, and it is marking the body in literally in flesh and blood, at least the male body. And I think in our world it's increasingly controversial. There aren't very many other circumstances in which we intentionally wound babies. We think it's worth it. I mean, there's a great midrash. The wicked Turnus Rufus, the Roman guy, asks Rabbi Akiva, what's better, God's deeds or human deeds? And Rabbi Akiva says, well, human deeds. And Turnus Rufus says, well, can you make the sun and can you make the mountains? And he says, this is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Turnus Rufus goes on and says, well, if you think God's deeds are so terrific, how come people aren't born circumcised? Men aren't born circumcised. And Rabbi Akiva says, gives us something to do to take nature and bring it up a notch, to take wheat and turn it into bread, and to take all kinds of natural products and turn them into something up a notch. And so to the human body, you take the male human body, baby body, and give it what we take to be some kind of a refinement, not a ritual wound or something like that. But I think it's kind of interesting. I said I would ask a question. I've talked for a long time now, but do you like have you seen greater resistance? Do you think we will see greater
I
resistance?
think
What
we
do you think
will.
about
I think it's part. It does come in waves. I think we're in a moment, both in the general culture and in Jewish culture, where the whole idea of the body is now part of identity, and the autonomy over the body is part of your identity. And what circumcision is claiming is that the body belongs to a culture that is in conflict with the radical autonomy of people. I think the movement known as intactivism has with it some. I'm very critical of it. I want to say obviously, but there is not a small bit of anti-Semitism in that, and in general, there is a sense that in a world where you see things like, for example, tattooing is very, very common and a public demonstration of identity. The idea that I want to control my body and what is on it and how it is configured, I think, is a very, very powerful part. And so I can consider myself lucky that as a rabbi, I haven't had too many of these kinds of discussions, but I know from colleagues that they're having more and more of these discussions. No question about it.
I've only had my first such
yeah,
discussion.
and what I want to say is that it's not reconcilable. The position the anti-circumcision position is rooted in almost an equivalent irrational foundation as ours is. Ours, it comes from belief in 4,000 years of Jewish practice, or 4,000 years of practice rooted in the biblical experience. It's hard to argue with that, and people are unmoved by that.
I've only had my first such conversation, and it isn't really about the issues that you're talking about now with this particular person. It actually was a different issue, which has to do, or at least it may involve this also, but another nuance of the question for this person has to do with the sort of fundamental. This religion is about men and their male organs, and it's absolutely true. I have wonderful baby namings for girls, and I love them, and I'm glad in the 21st century that in the rabbinate I've been able to have baby namings for girls that are as celebratory. But you know what? This is 4,000 years of Jewish practice. It's flesh and blood. It's powerful in a way that the equivalent ceremony for girls just isn't.
Yeah, good thing that it isn't. Okay, sorry. This is the closest that we get to anything remotely sacrificial in nature, and that hovers at the experience. Okay, it's a good thing that we don't practice anything surgical on girls. Go ahead.
I think that one thing we recognize is that part of the power of the ritual is its primitive nature, and its primitive nature is inextricably linked to blood. What distinguishes a Brit Milah from a Simchat Bat, a baby naming for a girl, is that there is no blood. And there's certainly, as a result, a lot less dramatic tension. We can make the same observation by comparing sacrifice and prayer. Sacrifice, I think, because of the blood involved, commands our attention in a way that most of us who take prayer seriously even, and try to daven 3 times a day with kavanah, find it very difficult to do because it lacks some dramatic tension.
Yeah.
It was, the first great Dr. J, Samuel Johnson, who said there is nothing like a hanging to concentrate the mind. And not that I want to compare hanging to a circumcision. I think, though, that we have to recognize that there is something good and something beautiful about attaching ourselves to a multi-thousand-year tradition and standing, making our link with it and carrying the chain forward.
Yeah. And did he play for the Sixers also?
I think he was a minor league player at that time.
He was the 76 1776.
I wanted to use what you said as a segue to Parshat Hachodesh. What could be a better connection between Brit Milah and the the Passover ritual than the appearance of blood? So Hachodesh, we've talked about it in its context, but since this is Shabbat Hachodesh, takes us back to chapter 12 in the book of Exodus. We will be taking out 3 Torahs, one for the HaChodesh and one for the Rosh Chodesh reading this week. So it starts off by saying, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim. This month shall be to you the first of all months. Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashanah. And in this commandment of the Passover ritual, Moses speaks to the entire people and says, everybody should take ish v'ikhu lahem ish seh levet avot seh labayit. You take a lamb. Each household will take a lamb. I always like to comment on that the Passover experience, is the family experience par excellence, and that in this formation of the free community, we are starting with the building block of family. That the enslaved community is the community that has the family system destroyed. But the restored and free community is the community that has the family validated. And the validation of the family happens through the ritual of the Korban Pesach, or the ritual of preparing this meal and to eating this meal as a family. And of course, preparing the meal involves slaughtering a lamb and taking the blood and putting the blood on the doorposts and on the lintel. And we've talked about it in the past, and just as a reminder, it's a way of identifying, but it's also a way of sanctifying. And it's also saying in the most demonstrative way that home, I always think of this, it's I don't know what the Egyptian home looked like, but I'm thinking like, an igloo, a kind of dome, where they place the blood on the doorpost and on the lintel, and in a way it's the consecration of the home, like you're consecrating the altar. It's almost as if to say that the home becomes like this kind of this altar in which you are living, and then you are. I'm not sure where are you roasting this. You got to be roasting the thing outside, right?
Outside, got to be outside.
Yeah,
got to be outside.
So then you're eating it inside, I guess. You're eating it with your loins girded and you're wearing your clothes, your staff in hand, everything. You're ready to go. You are supposed to eat this meal with matzot and mirarim, and this becomes the way that the people nourish themselves, bind themselves together, and prepare for what is ahead. So I just want you to give me some Torah here. Comment on this. give me some of your.
By the way, I wasn't thinking about this until you just pointed out, and it's only logical that the cooking must have been outside for fire safety as well as just tremendous heat and everything.
Smoke.
Once you get it inside, b'bayit achad ye'achel, it shall be eaten in a single house. Lo totzi min habayit min habasar hachutza. You can't take the meat out of the house. I think that reinforces what you said about the home as altar. Once you get it into the place of sacred eating, you got to stay there. And it also says that the people couldn't go outside because of the fear of the angel of death. This is I think this is, of course, exactly as you said, a wonderful tight transition. At a Brit Milah, we recite the verse. The Hebrew word for blood is, typically speaking, a plural word, like mayim, water, plural, damim, blood, plural, and we recite this verse from Ezekiel. Va'omar lach b'damayich chayi, va'omar lach b'damayich chayi. You shall live in your bloods. To which the classic midrash is dam Pesach, dam Brit.
Yeah.
The blood on the doorpost of Passover, the blood of the lamb, the blood of circumcision. These are these covenantal acts that bind people together, flesh and blood. And okay, it is exactly as Barry said, kind of its power is its rawness, its primitivity, but that's kind of what makes it work. This is a blood ritual, and the people of Israel, though we strongly have an ethos of openness to conversion and everything like that, there is a way in which we have of talking about membership in the people of Israel, that it is flesh and blood. And that's why our rituals are what they are.
So it provides us with an interesting counterpoint to the first plague, which is turning the water into blood, taking the life force, and both blood and water are life forces, and ruining it. Neither the blood nor the water is potable once they are mixed. And at the end, with the 10th plague, the blood is prophylactic or therapeutic. It is what allows life to continue because it protects the Israelite household from the angel of death, the mashchit. And the other thing I would add here is that there are a lot of transitions, as you suggested, Elliot, inside the house, outside the house, but also between slavery and freedom. And the image that we're left with, I think, is that we have the family unit, and we have to mention that if the family was too small, they have to join another household because there could be nothing left over. And I think for the same reason, you couldn't take anything out of the house. What happens here stays here, so to speak, to borrow a modern idiom. But this moment of redemption is on the private level, and it doesn't become national until the morning when they leave Egypt.
Well, they leave in the middle of the night, and
well, there are two versions in the Torah.
We debate this because I actually think that they left the lamb roasting and they didn't eat it, and they only eat the matzah the following day. But we can
would run afoul of Baal Tashchit.
Well, that's the whole thing. The whole thing is that there's something sacred to the Egyptian, and it's burning. It's burning in front of the Egyptians, and I accord this as the greatest moment of Israel is that they're leaving on an empty stomach, and that itself functions as a barrier, a boundary, the same way that fasting functions. And I one of these days, I know you guys disagree with me on this.
Okay, but I have to add something, because the way you're presenting it, it seems like the lamb is being roasted lahachis, simply to anger the Egyptians. And I think that takes away from the holiday.
I don't think so. Fact, no. I think this is the way. I think this is the way the Torah works. The Torah works is, here's the plan. The plan is you're supposed to eat it, and everything goes awry. Look, we just read a parsha last week where here's the plan. The plan is you're going to have a celebration. You're going to inaugurate the sanctuary, and you're going to have a great feast. And then, of course, what happens? It's the two sons of Aaron get zapped. So here, the plan is that, they're supposed to eat it. They're supposed to have the full, leave on a full stomach. They're supposed to be completely nourished. But what happens? What happens is that Pharaoh, and the entire Egyptian goes into a cataclysm. They scream and yell, and they say, get them out of here. It's not their plan. I don't know. Dumbfounded? Quiet?
Just dumb.
Let me move to another theme, okay?
All right.
On the theme of family and on the theme of community, and this is, Pesach is really the particular experience. It's a private experience as a family and a community. I want to say Sukkot is for everybody. But Pesach is like intimate. There's an intimacy here. The fact that it's eaten in the home, the fact that you are to be holding on to each other. There's a degree of intimacy here, which you don't find at Sukkot.
I'm not sure about the distinction because, like the Rambam says in Hilchot Yom Tov, one wonderful line. He says, if you just celebrate with your own family and you don't open the door to the poor and you don't go to make sure everybody has a place, then it's not Simchat Yom Tov, it's Simchat Kereso. It's like, it's not the joy of a holiday, it's just the joy of your own, filling your own big belly. And so I do think that in Sukkot, we similarly have a sense that the feasting places are public. You bring other people into that family, and I think that the way we celebrate Sedarim, for the reason that Barry said, im mehayot habayit miot miseh, ma'at habayit miot miseh, if the house is too small to eat the lamb itself, you got to bring other people, you got to bring other people, you got to bring other people, and the Talmud imagines like all of Israel celebrating up on the Temple Mount. I think that there's an element that is, well, I guess the word I would say is communal, not in the sense of sharing communion, sharing a
Right. So
meal.
I'll say something controversial, which is communal but Jewish, in the sense
Oh,
that, I mean, and the Bible itself prohibits the consumption of the Korban Pesach by uncircumcised people. And so, in a way, it's saying, look, the covenantal experience is a unique experience, that it belongs to the people of Israel, and people outside of the covenant do not get to partake of the covenantal meal. I think that puts us at great odds, in the modern period where so many of our families include non-Jews, and we want to be hospitable to them, of course. And we would never say to someone, who's part of our family, that you can't come to the Seder. But there is this deeper tension within the Passover experience, and I always, get agitated or excited about this whenever I see, another Haggadah, that is outside of the telling a different kind of story, basically. And it's a great paradigm. The Seder is a fantastic model for experiences and narrative, but it's uniquely Jewish. It's particularly Jewish, is what I'm saying.
Well,
we have,
I would have to take issue with you. For this, as you know, there is a tradition not to have non-Jews come to the Seder based on the pasuk that you mentioned about the uncircumcised not participating in the Korban Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice. But that was for the days when the temple stood. And we no longer live in a world with a temple. And maybe our understanding of the covenant and the nation has changed. And that we want to be more inclusive when we can be, and not so reductionist when it comes to the celebration of Pesach. We call it in our traditions, Man Cherutenu, the time of our freedom. And I think at heart, we believe that freedom is a birthright of all human beings, not just the Jews.
I agree, and I would say great narrative for another holiday, for Sukkot. I mean, I don't want to. Obviously, we'll be hospitable. Obviously, welcome and teach and be as universal as possible. But there's a fundamental tension going on here, and I think it does manifest itself in contemporary Jewish life.
Right, it does, but I think we need to be cautious when we veer off into thinking that the national means being parochial. I think there is a universal dimension to nationality as well.
Yeah, but
this is such a complicated conversation, because on the one hand, the story that we tell, without the particularist dimension, without saying, Avadim Hayinu, the fall of Mitzrayim. And if God had not taken us, we were slaves. And this is our experience that we're driving home. And if we were not slaves, if we were not taken out, we would still be there. And that's the experience that we try to reinforce, which is a particular experience. And instinctively, I agree that the fullest richness of Pesach has to reckon with that. And it's impossible not to notice that one of the great elements of religious borrowing, in the contemporary world, especially, has to do with Black Americans and the appropriation of the Exodus story. That is like just a fabulously inspiring, use of shared religious tradition. So, of course, it is true that this speaks to more than just us, and I believe that our practice of Passover is a profoundly particularistic kind of moment.
Yeah, look, I think it's reflected in this chapter in Exodus. I mean, I don't want to do too much projection there, although that's what I'm doing. It's just to say, chapter 12 speaks to a certain part of the Jewish condition, which is that this is the intimate experience of family, or family joined together with other families. and that your family experience, as we all know, and as every person watching this knows, when you're with your family alone, or even with the first or second degree around your family, it's a microculture, and you are encoding your story, your personal and familial story, which includes the thing outside, into that very, very sensitive and beautiful and delicate and fragile entity and system of the family. Look, I love the communal seder, and I miss the opportunity, really, quite emotionally, of having that, especially during these years when we can't do it. They're remarkable experiences to have a large communal seder. Really, I love them. But the private family experience, that's when you encode memories. Your child recites the Manishtana for the first time. I mean, it's one of those great moments, and it's not only about that, it's about saying, here's the moment, here are the experiences that we will give to our children, that they will remember much more than just sitting around. They'll remember the love and the content and the food and the laughter and the joy of being a family. So it's all that combined. It's mysterious in all that ways.
Amen.
Well, we're gonna have to conclude on that note. Shabbat Hachodesh, Rosh Chodesh Nisan. We want to wish everyone a good Shabbos, and we'll see you again on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Thanks for joining.
Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov. Bye-bye.